introduced, my name is Charlie Biedenharn, and I'm really happy to be here. I'm really flattered and honored that Kylie and Amy and Katie reached out, and I was unsure if I was going to be able to make it work. I'm super busy right now. We're trying to get this place in Austin open in the next couple of weeks, and it worked out perfectly, and it seemed right that it was about chaos as well. So, and I had to seize the opportunity to be the first speaker because I figured that there would be no real basis for comparison, at least locally. So the likelihood of all you guys being really disappointed by this would be lower than if I followed somebody who was really awesome last month or something. So yeah, I'm 36. I was born and raised here, I was gone out of San Antonio for a large part of my late teens and 20s. This place has always been my home. And I came back around 27 and I had been back and forth at times or spent little bouts here in between destinations, but yeah, I came back for good, I would say, or with the intention of being here for good around 27, and I love it here. It's really, I'm so glad I did, and I feel really just excited to be part of this community. So, next slide. So this is a picture of the Relajos, a pastry we make. Some of you guys might recognize it from the Grand Budapest Hotel, and it's one of my favorites. But I'm one of the co-owners and operators of Bakery Lorraine. We founded Bakery Lorraine in 2011 with my two business partners and pastry chefs, Jeremy Mandrell and Ann Ing. I don't think they're here. We started in 2011 at the Corey Farmers Market, which is no longer in existence. And I can say that never in our wildest dreams did we think we would have a bakery like we do now. I thought we were going to open a food truck. And shortly after, we grew into a house that was about 1,200 square feet. Some of y'all might remember it over on Grayson Street. I think we all miss it. My partners and I do. And then, you can go to the next slide. And now we have multiple cafes, a dedicated bakery, and are about to open our first store in Austin, which I'm really excited about too. And so when I was presented with a list of topics to give a presentation on, chaos immediately stood out, as I think most of my day-to-day work life feels like I'm on the razor's edge of sanity. But anybody who manages a lot of people, especially in food service, I think can relate. But once I started to put this presentation together, I realized that this topic really resonated on a much deeper level with me. And here's a picture of my favorite sandwich. It's the BLT. You can go to the next one. I found this picture. I had to put it in. It's one of my favorite pictures. It's like one of the few pictures I have, I think, of my whole family together. And that was my first dog, and then my mom and dad, and me, and Porter Rances when I was a little kid. So to talk about chaos, I have to go all the way back to my childhood. And I had a great childhood. I had two very loving parents, but things really did not go according to plan. My father's business plans did not work out as he expected. Substance abuse accelerated his downfall and contributed to an overall chaotic dynamic. In 1986, they both contracted an illness that at the time was the subject of national hysteria and would play a factor in their deaths much later in life. And at the time, I was young and could not really synthesize what was going on. But our lives were thrust into total uncertainty for a significant period of time. They divorced shortly after this, and on the one hand, my childhood felt a lot like any other kid's, in that I went to school, I hung out with my friends, I never went without, and I generally felt very lucky. But on the other hand, I think maybe there was this sense of uncertainty and security that was abnormal. Either way, uncertainty and this element of chaos were insidious, even though my mom and both my parents, for that matter, did their utmost to give me the best childhood possible. Next slide. Needless to say, it's been a very chaotic and circuitous path through my life to this point. This can largely be attributed to a lot of external factors, but also, I think internally, as it took me more than an ample amount of time to realize some of the more basic axioms that many people understand much earlier in life. So I was a slow learner, and for whatever reason, I've not had the ability to learn from other people's mistakes. I had to make them all myself. But I guess I got the experience to show for it. So, next slide. I think the majority of my 20s is well summed up by this image. While I was able to later mature and depart from a life of reckless partying and substance use, I think that I can now see pretty clearly that I turned to this stuff in an attempt to try to impose some order on the chaos of the world, and really internally too, I think, or at least get some relief. And honestly, I think looking back too, I see that as soon as I stopped relying on substances or reckless behavior, I quickly found a new chaotic force to kind of supplant that chaos, in the form of work and stress, and so what I mean by that is I think I went from being an alcoholic to a workaholic, and it's kind of like the lamest transition ever, I think. But you can go to the next one. So, as I mentioned, in 2011, we started Bakery Lorraine, and not long after we opened our first location on Grayson, we were just immediately busy. And thankfully, this was our problem, but we were really, I would say, ill-prepared for the sudden volume. I think San Antonio at the time was kind of going through somewhat of a transition, at least around that location and where the bakery was in the urban core, and so we were not ready. And at the same time, I also got the great idea that in the evening, I would pursue a master's in business administration from UT in Austin. So I started commuting to Austin several times a week after work, working on my master's for the next 3 years. And I really wish that I would have consulted a sane person before doing this, because really throughout this time I was really inundated by stress and started to get to know chaos like I never really knew before. I mean, I think that I pushed some limits in my brain that I don't know that are as elastic as I thought they were. You know, I was overwhelmed by responsibilities at our fledgling company, and I always felt that there were not enough hours in the day to get back and forth to Austin and subsequently complete my work. And I think at this point that there was a certain recognition that chaos has always been this major theme in my life. And however, things had changed, and I wasn't like the sole reckless creator of chaos anymore, in the same capacity maybe that I once was in my teens or early 20s and stuff like that, but it was still the same outcome. And I think that I really felt pretty swallowed by it, and at the whim of the external world. You know, anything could kind of come along at any given moment and hijack my day or my, you know, week or month, and you know, it was crazy, you know. And I remember one day thinking, as I was driving back at like 11 at night, only to get up super early the next day and again to work, and that I was like, man, I don't know how I'm going to be able to pull this off, you know. I'm not sure how long I can keep doing this. And fortunately, not long after that, I started to realize a few things. And basically, that maybe I should just accept chaos, and maybe it's possible to thrive in it. And so over the last few days, I scoured the internet for definitions of chaos, and here are a few that I found. Complete disorder and confusion. 2, the property of a complex system whose behavior is so unpredictable as to appear random. I think I really relate with that one. 3, a confused mass or mixture. And 4, the inherent unpredictability in the behavior of a complex natural system. So then I also looked into the etymology of the word, and I learned that chaos is derived from the Greek word chaos, spelled K-H-A-O-S, meaning abyss or void. And it was not until several hundred years later in the Roman Empire that Ovid associated the word with a jumbled, formless mass like we see here. But really, it wasn't until the 16th century that writers who were studying the classics started to put this kind of negative connotation on it that we so often use today. And I found that really interesting. You can go to the next slide. Yeah. So I want to say I love structure. I do. As a contrast to chaos, I love structure. And when I was thinking about it, the one thing I think of structure more than anything is like the North Korea synchronized parades that they have. And so I have to have a pretty rigorous structure in my day and life in order not to drown in chaos every day, I think. And it seems like as a society, we strive for, and I think we're taught very young, or at least I was, for some sort of order and certainty in everything that we do. From the way that we try and invest our money, to the relationships that we want to have with the natural world and environment. We work and try to control things outside of our grasp and somehow bend unpredictable factors to conform to our needs. You know, in our business, I spend a lot of time, and my managers spend a lot of time trying to structure almost every task. And only because I've realized I have to. At first, I learned very early on that I could not leave anything up to interpretation when it came to operations. You know, it's and you know there's little room for improvisation in certain systems. You know, and so I started to really appreciate imposing structure and order within certain parameters. And but I think that you know that sorry, I'm digressing, but with that said, I found managing people to be one of the most challenging tasks that I've ever undertaken. Where often successes would look like failures by many other metrics. If you know, I think that if I can get like 40 or 50% of the people to do what I want them to do, that's a big victory. You know, and after running restaurants for a while and growing a company, I'm really even more in awe of how Kim Jong-un got all these people to do this. I mean, even under the threat of like death, I think that we have a hard enough time getting our people to show up for work like relatively on time. So you can go to the next one. So these days, my life consists of organization, schedules, and checklists. However, the margins of all these various media are filled with scribble. And it's really in the margins that I live. You know, and on a particularly overwhelming day, I'll look at my planner or list, and I long for the days of homework and projects. You know, like I never thought I would say that, but I long for the days of school where I had the, you know, clear and concise tasks and objectives that I could meet and realize. Where I was able to manage well and meet deadlines, finish the school day, the assignment or the task, and then get a reprieve by finishing my work. You know, and I never thought that when I was in school that I would ever be standing in front of a group of people and telling them I wish I was back in school. But you know, I think that this proposition of this unending task list is really overwhelming to me. You know, you can go to the next one. So this leads me to the dreadful realization that my life no longer works that way. Most of my problems are non-binary. There is no conclusion to many tasks, and oftentimes any problem that I have at any given time has a multitude of right and wrong answers, and even if there were just one answer, there would be no, the conclusion is arrived by, there would be no way for it to be revealed until I'm already well committed to a certain answer. So you know, there's no right or wrong almost. Furthermore, there are then a multitude of external variables that are outside my control that may impact the result and ultimately influence the outcome. So oftentimes, even in spite of my best efforts, the end result may still be totally unpredictable, and if I'm attached to trying to control it, then that is a pretty hopeless outlook, which leads me into the death cycle of inaction that you see in the slide here. So, as you guys can probably tell from the way this talk is going, I have read a lot of self-help books. And I'm really not trying to be the obscure, tattooed version of Tony Robbins up here. I always go back to this particularly dark period of my life where I was where I was rifling through tons of self-help books at a bookstore like a crazy person in the aisle, and because I was trying to justify some unsavory behavior in my life at the time, and so I never found one, but to justify it. But I learned a lot about all these self-help stuff on the way. So I apologize if this talk echoes that sentiment. It's but when reflecting on the thinkers that wrote on chaos, the first that comes to mind is Jung. And on my coffee table, I have a very large copy of Carl Jung's Red Book. And unfortunately, it does not get opened very much by me. I think it's really there to show that I'm smart and enigmatic. But in it, he writes, if one opens up chaos, magic also arises. And he also writes, if one has done one's best to steer the chariot, and then notices that a greater other is actually steering it, then the magical operation takes place. One cannot say what the effect of magic will be, since no one can know in advance, because the magical is lawless, which occurs without rules and by chance, so to speak. And as the psychologist posits about this interpretation, the greater other here could be God or the gods, the archetypes, the collective unconscious, or the self apart from the rational. And so it's with this recognition or surrender or acceptance to the chaos, and a departure from this like unrelenting rational mind that tries to hold on, that's like gripping the steering wheel all the time. That's what I can interpret from this, you know. And you can go to the next one. Okay. And so it's with this perspective that I cling to the shreds of sanity that I may or may not have left. This appraisal is not simply on a macro level of what has or has not happened in my life, or how I make sense of hard times and absolute chaos. It's also the realization that life is absolutely unpredictable and disorganized every day, and in even the most mundane task. That I can always continue to try in vain. That I can always continue to try in vain to assert my will over the world, being disappointed and hurt every time, where I can let go, make an effort, and accept that there are chaotic forces at work. I can swim with the current rather than against it, and let the river take me where it may, rather than looking to try and constantly shape the world. So the reality of shape the world to fit my mold or conform to my expectations. Working to have my life and perspective meet the reality of the world. When I look back at all the decisions and outcomes that at the time seemed unfavorable or catastrophic, seldom do I ever feel regret about them, and most of the time I'm even grateful that things did not work out the way I initially wanted them to. What once felt like total chaos because it was not congruent with my expectations can make perfect sense in a different light, or given some time, and more often than not, works out better than I ever thought it could have. I don't say this in an uplifting way or to try to put a positive spin on negative events. That is not really what I'm referring to. What I mean specifically is that I oftentimes, if I'm honest, really don't know, and that it's probably pretty delusional if I think I know, or if I even think I know what the absolute best outcome is. So, next slide. And so it's with this compass, or perspective, that I try and orient my life. Most of the time I fail. My default programming is to get attached to an outcome or expectation, or to worry about possible variables or circumstances. However, on a good day, that response is short-lived. Through enough repetition, or practice, or intuition, or whatever you want to call it, I now know better. I know that I'm subject to chaos. I can accept that. Sometimes I put up a fight on the way down, but less and less. It's up to me to discern the forces that are within my reach and those that are outside of it, and really not much else. And if I can accept that and even welcome the chaos and unknown, then I can focus on doing my best to enjoy the ride. Thank you all